Sorry about that, everybody. My husband is fixing things. And he disconnected me from the internet for a minute. But we're good. Hello, Michael Paw. Welcome to another Monday. Morning, Johnny Sin. I hope that's how long it's supposed to go. I hope you guys had a good weekend. Hopefully it was good. Don't they always go by too fast? On, let's see, Saturday, I spent all day building storage shelves in the basement. Then Sunday, I spent all day cleaning and doing laundry. And then I was like, it'd be great if there was one more day to not be on my feet. But alas, it is Monday. Which, I mean, Monday I sit in front of my computer all day. So, such is the life when it comes to COVID and learning and teaching and working. Sit on your butt and stare at a computer. Although I'm sure it's more exhausting for you guys than it is for me, because you're learning new stuff, which is exciting, but learning new things is exhausting, which is why kids sleep so long, because they're constantly learning new things. At least that's my hypothesis. Kitty, good question. Okay, lots of questions. One thing at a time. So, Kitty, your question to campus reopening. So as instructors, as teachers, as professors, we have been told that they want to have as many on-campus offerings as possible. What I think that means is I think every class is going to have an in-class component. I do think there's going to still be a reduction in classroom capacity. So what I think is going to happen, personally, what I think is going to happen in fall is that you will have a choice. You can go be on campus. You might not be, it's probably not going to be like it was before COVID. It's probably going to be, you'll be in class some of the time in person. Some of the time will be videos remotely. I don't know what that means in terms of the dorms and students interacting with each other outside of the classroom, but I think that's how it's going to be, where you would come to class once or twice a week and you would still watch some videos or some lectures via video. That's my opinion based on what I'm getting. But I mean, as you guys know, things change all the time. How many hours of sleep do I get on a daily basis? I try to fall asleep or go to bed between 10:30, and I try to get up between 6:30. So I've always slept. Like, even in college, if I went to bed past midnight, I was going to bed late. So I'm one of those weird people. Yeah, I prioritize sleep. I need my sleep. What's the possibility of getting false positives or plagiarism on the homeworks? Very low. If you're concerned about getting marked for plagiarism, that is suspicious. Do your own work. And if you get flagged, then you will receive an email. And I mean, you can always fight it. That's not a problem. But if you're concerned about getting flagged, that's pretty suspicious. So don't worry about getting flagged for plagiarism. Worry about figuring out your own homework and writing it yourself. Okay, great questions. Let's go ahead and get started. So, some fun tidbits, some fun strategies about the video comprehension quizzes. I read a lot of your guys' responses, a lot of your guys' feedback on that question, that last question. And a lot of you guys were saying, I'm having trouble with arrays. Of course you're having trouble with arrays. This is new material. The videos are not meant to be comprehensive. So watch through the videos, answer the questions, maybe try the quiz 1-2 times. If you're not getting all of the points, then just wait. Wait until you've had 1 or 2 lectures, tried the homework a little bit, read some of the Ibooks, and then go back and try it again. No one says you need to get a 100 right away. No one says that you need to know everything immediately when you take the quiz. Try it a couple times. If you don't get all the questions, revisit it later on in the week. Okay? 10 plus times, that's a lot of times. I think you could have tried most combinations with 10 plus times. So if you're not getting it 100% right away, take a pause and revisit it later in the week. Hopefully, as you try more material, as you get more exposure, it will make more sense. Go back, revisit it. Can you guys not see your previous attempts? Did I not set it up that way? Johnny, advice for undergrad mental health stress. That's difficult. Everybody's going to have a different strategy. Okay. I can't remember how I set it up. It's always hard for me to set things up on UBLearns and see what it looks like for you guys as students. UBLearns isn't the best at doing that. Arcivo, that's a really good strategy. Anyway, mental health. Make a schedule, stick to it. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest issues with everybody being at home staring at their computers. There's no schedule. You don't get out. You don't move your body around like you did before. Make a schedule. Do your best to stick to it. It's hard, but everybody's strategies are different. MTM. These are under the week by week material. Watch the videos. Click on that link. Keep in mind, you have to be my student. I don't know who's here. Maybe not my students are here. Okay, so I mentioned before, practice comments. You don't need a lot of comments. You will not get points off on the homework for lack of comments, but you will get points off for the project. So practice. It's always a good idea to do comments. Okay. So before I get into the week 3 material, some of you guys in the video or in the feedback did mention that there's an error when you run your function files. So when you write a function, it looks like this. This is one of the functions I wrote last Wednesday. You cannot press run. You cannot press run when you write a function. You have to call your function. You have to use your function from another script file or from the command window. When you use a function, you type the name of the function, frustum sav, open close parentheses, you send it some data. So I have 1, 2, 3 inputs, so I'm going to send it 3 numbers or 3 pieces of data that it's going to use for R1, R2, and H. So let's say I want R1 to be 2.4, I want R2 to be 3.5, and I want H to be 4.6. And then on the other side, on the left-hand side of my equal sign, I would store my data in variables, so A and B. So now when I press enter, now it's going to use 2.4 for R1, 3.5 for R2, 4.6 for H, do the calculations with those values. Whatever it calculated for SAV, you would store in A. Whatever it calculated for VV would be stored in B. For homework 2, you're submitting 4 files. HW1P1, HW2P2, Parabola, Torus. Do not change the names. I believe in the homework document it says function files should be named the same as the function. I don't have time to look at that. You do not change the name. If your function's called parabola, you are submitting a file called parabola. It will automatically be tied to your name on UB-Learns. Okay. So, other things to mention. I'll mention them at the end. Okay, let's go ahead and get into material. Space engineering student, it will give you an error. You can try it, see what happens. So in the videos, I introduced very roughly this idea of arrays. So MATLAB, this is where MATLAB really shines. Other languages, you don't get to arrays until later on in learning, and you need some additional structures in order to work with arrays. With MATLAB, the inherent data, the inherent thing in a variable is an array. So thus far, we've been working with something called a scalar. All of our variables have been one-by-one arrays. One row, one column. Those are called scalars. I also introduced what a row vector is and a column vector, a single row, single column, and then a matrix. So we, this week, are going to talk about creating these arrays, modifying them, changing them, working with them. And next week, we will get to using these arrays in mathematical expressions. But this week is all about creating and modifying things. We're really going to focus on this idea that I talked about in the video. Where is it? There it is. Where we have two sides of our equal sign. We already know that. We've looked at two sides of our equal sign, but previously. We have our variable that goes over here and our expression that goes over here. So the left-hand side is the variable, the right-hand side is the expression. I want you guys to think about this as our left-hand side. Really, we're asking, where do we want to store the data? Previously, to date, it's a single variable. And then on the right-hand side, think about what do we want to store there? Previously, it was a single number. Now, what happens on both of these sides, it's either going to be a full array, part of an array, or a single value in an array. And the right-hand side, same thing. It can be either a whole array, it can be part of an array, and next week we'll get into more complicated what those expressions look like with arrays. But really, this is at the heart of this entire week. Asking, where do we want to store values? What do we want to store there? And then we're looking at the syntax of that. Okay, so I want to go through a bunch of examples. So hopefully you watched the videos. There was a lot there. I'll go through some of it today. We'll go through more examples on Wednesday. This morning, I felt like I just kind of like vomited information at students. I made some slight modifications, but it's gonna feel like a lot. So just walk with me. Ask questions, and we will make it through this material. Okay, so here we go. So here's my beautiful janky combination. Up top here, I have my notes. So essentially, I'm going to outline what we want to create. And on the bottom here, I have Matlab. So it doesn't quite match my overlay, but whatever. I changed it this morning. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create a row vector. So it's a row. That means it's one row by n columns, however many columns I have, with the following elements. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different expressions. So I'm going to create a row vector. That's a 1 by 6. One row, 6 columns. So you have to remember that brackets are used to create arrays. So we've got brackets. I'm creating a new array, so I have open close brackets. And then I'm going to have 6 different pieces I want to insert. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. To create a row array, we can separate them by commas or by spaces. You'll see me use both. Sometimes spaces, sometimes columns, or sometimes commas. Keep in mind, brackets are used for arrays. Parentheses are used for grouping. So arrays, grouping. Some of you guys used brackets in your homework 1 expressions in order to group things together, and technically that was not incorrect. You were just creating a 1-by-1 array. But Matlab will give you a warning. It's been giving me a warning in the last script files I've written. It's like, please use parentheses for grouping instead of brackets. So just keep that in mind. Parentheses are for grouping things, and then arrays, like grouping mathematical expressions, brackets are used to create arrays. So over in Matlab here, I am going to create this vector. I'm not told what to name it. I'm just gonna name it R1 for my first row vector. Okay. So R1 equals open close brackets. So over here, I am storing a whole array inside of a new variable called R1. And then open close brackets, and then I just type in everything. So 1 is my first element, then I have a comma, negative 2.1 cubed is my second element, comma, 17 divided by 6, and then I just keep going. Note that I can't type it has to be asterisk for multiplication. Hold on 1 second, Johnny. 7.5, nope, wrong one. 8e to the negative 4, and then cos pi over 4. So Johnny asked, was a little confused on what the arrow is in the notes. Because when I'm writing in the notes and I use arrows, I'm just pointing to things. So there's my row. There's my row vector. Note, I did put commas in between because I have mathematical expressions. It makes things a little clearer. I didn't need those technically. I could have just used spaces. Either one would work. I'm gonna put commas just because it's clear distinction. So when I press run, notice I didn't have a semicolon here, and it printed out R1 as a row because it's a row. Okay, we'll get to transpose in a little bit. In my workspace, you can see that the size of R1 is a 1/6. It's what I expected it to be. It's a row vector, 1 row, 6 columns. I have my values, I have min, max. If you want anything else in your workspace, you can just right-click this top bar up here and add anything else. Okay, so there's R1. That's one of the ways to create a row vector. Let's say I want to create another row vector. Create a row vector with 6 equally spaced elements in which the first element is 60 and the last element is 15. Okay, so let's look at what's given to me. I am told equally spaced. If you're ever told equally spaced, that means there are shortcuts. Use the shortcuts. Notice for this one, it was just numbers, random numbers. There's no relationship between them, so there's really no shortcuts. I have to type each element individually. For this one, though, they're equally spaced. I am told the number, so there are 6 total elements. And the first element is 60, so I need to start at 60 and then end at 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So I need an array that looks like this. I could figure out what the spacing needs to be and type them in. That's the long way to do it. If they're equally spaced, there are 2 shortcuts. We can use the Linspace function, or I can use the colon operator. And you use each one depending on what information you're given. If you are given the number, then you use Linspace. Terrible arrow. If you're given the total number, use Linspace. If you're given the spacing, use your colon operator. So for this one, I'm given the total number. So I'm going to use Linspace. Anytime you use a function, Linspace is a function. You type the name of the function, open close parentheses, and then Linspace requires 3 pieces of information. It requires the first number, the last number, and the total number of elements. So there we go. So over in my Matlab, I'll create a new variable called R2 because it's my second row vector. Linspace, open close parentheses. My first number is going to be 60. My last number is going to be 15, and I want 6 total elements. So now when I press run, R2 shows up, and it automatically figures out that I'm having 9 in between each element. So 60 and 51, there's 9 between that. 51 and 42, there's 9. 42 and 33, there's 9. 33 and 24, there's 9. 24 and 15, there's 9. So you can see R2 in my workspace, it's a 1 by 6. That contains all of my numbers. I could have also used the colon operator. And the colon operator, it would look like this. I would start at 60. I would end at 15. And then my spacing would be -9 because I'm going backwards. I'm going from bigger to smaller. So it would be -9 because I'm decrementing. So that's another way. Note, it gives me the same result. One of these is easier than the other. There's less work. If I wanted to use the colon operator, I would need to calculate what my spacing is, which is completely legitimate, not an issue. But the Linspace, if I know I just want 6 elements, it will figure it out for me. Okay, so there's another way to create a row vector. Let's do another one. Create a row vector of 6 elements that are equally spaced. So once again, equally spaced. I have 2 options between 1 and 12. Okay, so once again, I've got 2 options, Linspace or colon operator. I'm going to do the colon operator for this one. I'm going to start at 1, I'm going to end at 12, and now I need to figure out my spacing. So if you're starting at 1, let's change it to 2. Let's change it to 2, because then I'm not going to run into issues. If I want 2 to 12 and I want 6 values, shoot. Change it to 0. So 12 minus 0, that's a total of 12 range. Divide that by 6, and I end up with 2. So my spacing, in theory, should be 2. So let's test it out. 3, 0, 2, 12. Let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. Starts at 1, or 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Notice I have 7 values. I don't want 7 values, so that means I just need to adjust it and start at 2 instead. And that's where I was talking about running into issues. If I started at 1, let's see what happens. If I started at 1, then I would go to 1, then 3, then 5, then 7, then 9, and 11. Benny, what do you mean there's not an even spacing between each number? So between 0 and 2, there's 2. Between 2 and 4, there's 2. Between 4 and 6, there's 2. I think it needs to be n minus 1. There's technically a formula for this. Start minus end all over n minus 1, where n is the total number. That's your formula. No, so for Linspace, note there's differences. Linspace is the total number of elements. Okay, Linspace is different. You need the total number of elements. For the colon operator, you need the spacing. So both of them, you need the first number and the last number. For the Linspace, you need the total number of elements, and for colon operator, you need the spacing between them. You don't have these notes. BJ, Farrig, you don't have these notes. MTM, no, you do not need to use parentheses for the colon operator. You can group it together with parentheses. Matlab will be fine with that. You can also use brackets. Matlab will yell at you and be like, use parentheses for grouping. But you do not need them. In fact, they are frequently not used. Week 3 notes should be on UB Learns. Are they not on UB Learns? Did nobody tell me this? They should be there. They're in week 3, right under attend lecture, right under point number 3. Okay, so keep in mind the difference. Thank you, Johnny. Linspace, you need the total number of elements. Colon operator, you need the spacing. So keep in mind, when we do have a spacing of like 1 and 2 to 12, it starts at 1. It always is going to include the first number. And then it's going to keep incrementing. So it's going to be 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7, 7 plus 2 is 9. And it will get as close to, but not past this last number. Whereas Linspace will always have the first number and the last number in the vector. Okay, so you just got to mess around with it, play around with it. But those are the differences. Okay, let's keep going. I want to create now column vectors. Let's create column vectors. So column vector with following elements. A bunch of mathematical expressions again. Okay, so Betty, that's what you mean. So yes, so it's not evenly divisible. It will go as close to, but not past the last number. So here it can't get to 12. It will get to 11 and then stop, because the next number would be 13. Yeah. Okay, I'll just leave it like that. So it says create a column vector with following elements. Same idea. It's a column vector, so now it's an m by 1. I'm going to have however many rows and 1 column. Same thing, I'm creating an array, so I need open close brackets. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements again. Now, instead of using spaces or commas between the elements, I can use semicolons. Oops. When you are creating arrays, semicolons are used to stack things on top of each other. Okay, so there's 2 instances where you would use a semicolon. You would use a semicolon at the end of each line of code. Here I have semicolon, semicolon, semicolon after each of these 3 lines because I want to suppress the output. I don't want them printed out in my command window anymore. Another place you would use semicolons is in creating arrays where you want to stack things on top of each other. So depending on what you're trying to do, you use different things, and different things might be used in different contexts. So you have 2 different places where you might use semicolons. So sometimes you just got to talk things through to figure out, am I using this notation or this notation? One of you guys, somebody mentioned that in their feedback on the quiz of not knowing when to use a semicolon, where, so just, a semicolon has 2 uses: suppress the output at each line of code, stack things on top of each other when creating arrays. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this column vector. So C1 equals open close brackets. Sure, I can go over these questions on the quiz. They were a little harder. I can do that on Wednesday. Okay, so then we have SQRT 4.7 cubed, semicolon, because I want the next value to be below it. 6.43 E2, and then 2.1 plus 6.3 squared times cos D 40, and then just keep going. 38.7 nth root 89. 4. I don't feel like typing the last number, so I'll just do tan D of 25. I know that's not it. Okay, so notice when I typed row vectors, they showed up as rows in my command window if I left the semicolon off. Columns, whoop, and I lost my semicolon. Change all of these to semicolons. Come on. There it is. Notice when now a column is printed out in my command window, it is a column. And in my workspace, I now have a 6 by 1 versus a 1 by 6. And that is one of the ways to create a column vector. Same idea though. We only want to do that if there is no, thank you. If there is no other option, if there's not linearly spaced, if there's no other way that we can create it. If we want to type out the values, really that should be our last option. Okay, so let's keep going. It says create a column vector of 6 elements that are all 23. So I could just say C1 equals 23, 23, 23, 23, 23, 23. But like I said, that is the last option. We want to exhaust all other possibilities because it's fine for 6 numbers, but let's say we have to put in 100 numbers. That's obnoxious. So what we can do in this instance, we can actually use the Linspace function again. The Linspace function, if we give it 23 as our start and our end, it will put a spacing automatically as 0, which we want 6 elements. So I could type this instead. So this is just a trick with the Linspace function. 23, 23, 6. It will automatically give me a spacing of 0, which I don't know. We'll see if the colon operator does that. Oops, wrong one. Remember, though, that Linspace gives us row vectors. If I want to convert a row vector into a column vector, I'm going to use the transpose operator, which is just a single apostrophe after the end of my line of code. So this is saying create a row vector, starting at 23, ending at 23, 6 numbers, and then transpose it. Transpose is going to convert columns into rows and rows into columns. So essentially just tilts everything up on its side. So now C1 is tilted. It's now, instead of a row, it's a column. That is another way to create column vectors. Create a row vector and then transpose it. Flip it up on its side. I need to turn off notifications before coming to class. Forgot to do that. Okay, let's see. So it automatically does it. It does both at the same time. It's just, you just don't realize it. So technically C1 is 1 row, 6 columns. So this now becomes the first row. This becomes the second row. This becomes the third row. This becomes the second row, or the fourth row, then the fifth row, then the sixth row. At the same time, this row becomes the first column. So it does both. It does both at the same time. You don't really need to think about it that way, though, but it does both at the same time. And if you can transpose it twice, so you can do it, I can transpose my transpose, and it'll give me the row back. Okay, let's keep going. Create a column vector with 6 elements, once again, that are equally spaced between 1 and 12. I already did that in row 3. So all I need to do, whoops, this should be C2. All I need to do to create my third column vector is take R3 and transpose it. Not an issue. So there we go. Now it's R3 just transposed. Okay, so I have these 6 vectors. 3 row vectors, 3 column vectors. Let me try something. Let's say 23, 0, 23. Okay, so notice I can't have a spacing of 0 in a colon with the colon operator. It gives me an empty vector. That's a fun thing to try. Okay, let's keep going. Next, create a matrix where the previous vectors are row vectors. So I have 3 of them. I have R1, R2, R3, R4, nope, not right. C1, C2, and C3. And I want to create a matrix where these vectors are row vectors. So notice C1, C2, and C3 are not rows, they are columns, so I will just transpose them. And then I just want to stack these rows on top of each other. So if I'm going to create a matrix, M1, open close bracket, I'm going to put R1 on top of R2, on top of R3, on top of C1 transposed, that's not right, transposed, on top of C2 transposed, on top of C3 transposed. Okay, so remember, semicolons are used to stack things on top of each other. So when I run this, this was row 1, R2, R3. This is C1 transposed, C2 transposed, C3 transposed. And they're nicely stacked together inside of my matrix. I could also do it where these are columns. So if I want to put R1 transposed next to R2 transposed, next to R3 transposed, next to C1, next to C2, next to C3. This will also create a matrix. It's not the same one because it's the transpose of it. But that's another way I can put a matrix together. I can put columns next to each other. Traditionally, we put rows on top of each other, but you can also put columns next to each other. But keep in mind, semicolons put things next to each other. Commas, or no, semicolons stack things on top of each other. Commas put things next to each other. Would the transpose operator be necessary if you're using the semicolon? So if I did this, so let's do this, see what happens. I get an error. It says dimensions of arrays being concatenated are not consistent. So what happens here is it's trying to take row 1, put it on top of row 2, put it on top of row 3, put that on top of C1, next to C2, next to C3. So it depends on the order in which you want to do things. If you want to make sure these are grouped together first, then you would put brackets around it. So you're essentially creating an array inside of an array. I think this would still give us an issue. So when you are putting rows on top of rows on top of rows on top of rows, they need to all be the same length. Same thing, columns next to columns next to columns next to columns, etc. need to have the same size, like they need to be the same number of rows. When you're doing this way, you need to be really careful because it's going to do it in this order. So it's going to take row 1, try to put it on top of row 2, try to put it on top of row 3. When you do this, you end up with this result. You're going to end up with a 3 by 6. However, when you do this, put C1 next to C2 next to C3, you're going to end up with this. So if you try to stack this on top of this, it will give you an error because it's not going to result in something square. You're missing some values over here that it's trying to find and it can't find. So you need to be really careful when you put rows, columns, other matrices together because it needs to end up with something square. Okay. So yes, you need the transpose. I think that's what you're trying to ask, Nick. Okie dokie. Yes, okay. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Just curious if we can do diagonal changes in the matrix. What do you mean by diagonal changes? You can modify the matrix. Once again, keep in mind, where do you want, left-hand side is where do you want to store things, right-hand side is what do you want to change it to. Okay, let's keep going. Let's start modifying things. So the next thing I'm going to do is it says use rand_i function to create a matrix. I'm going to make this bigger over my face. Come on. Hold on. Woo! Changes on the fly. Mitchell, can you transpose a matrix? Absolutely. Let's say M1 transpose. It's the same size. You can't really see it very well. But it will take the rows and make them columns. So it takes this first row, makes it the first column. Takes the second row, makes it the second column. Third row, third column, etc. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I want to use the rand_i function to create a matrix. You guys don't need to necessarily worry too much about knowing how to use the rand_i function. I'm just going to show you how to use it. So I'm going to create a matrix called A, create it with random integers. That's what rand_i stands for, random integers. And I'm going to give it the range, so -10 to 10. I want numbers between -10 and 10. And then I want a 5 by 6 matrix. So when I run it, it gives me a random matrix full of integers, or an matrix full of random integers that has 5 rows, 6 columns. That's it. It will give you different integers every time as well. Okay, and then I want to do these 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 things. Okay. First thing I want to do, delete column 3. After that, I want to print out the element in row 4, number 3, then create a couple subarrays and create some stuff. So essentially what we're doing is when we have a matrix, we can access and treat each individual piece by identifying which row and column they're in. So in order to do that, we use open close parentheses. So it's kind of like writing a function where you're saying, I want these rows and these columns. So I type the name of my matrix, which is A, and then identify which rows and which columns I want to work with. So here's A. It looks like this. I have 5 rows, 6 columns. I can do groups of that. I can do individual pieces of that, as long as I identify which rows and which columns I want to work with. If I want to access all of the rows, I do have a shorthand notation with a colon. So colon indicates all rows or all columns. Okay, so that's a shorthand notation that I can use to indicate the number of rows and the number of columns. So let's start with the first thing, delete column 3. So in A, open close parentheses, I am going to modify, I am going to change, I'm going to store in column 3, nothing. So on the left-hand side, in A, I want all of my rows, column 3. And I'm going to store empty braces, which means empty. So this means all of the rows. That means row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Column 3, this one here. So all of the rows in column 3 is this entire column. I want to store empty. So when I do this, it's going to take out, notice A is not the same. Okay, so here's A, and it deletes column 3. So now I have row 1 is the same, row 2 is the same, row 3 is gone. So my new row 3 was from 4, then 5, then 6. So over here is where do I want to store things? What am I going to change? Over here is what I'm going to change it to. Okay, let's keep going. Next thing I want to do, access the element in row number 4, column number 3. I'm going to create a new variable to store that value. I'll call it ELE for element. And I want to access the element in row 4, column 3. So I just type A, open close parentheses, row 4, column 3. So over in A here now, this previous one from line 12 looks like this. In row 4, column 3. The overlap of that is this single number, -8. So ELE should store a value of 2 because my random numbers changed. But note, it's the element in row 4, column 3. Was this 2? So note, what do I want to store there? Where do I want to store it? Let's do the next one. Create a subarray that consists of columns 1, 2, and 5. So subarray 1, I want to store what rows, what columns. So something in A, what rows, what columns. If I'm trying to do all of the columns or all of the elements in column 1, 2, and 5, I just type colon to indicate all of the rows in columns 1, 2, and 5. So I just put brackets and say columns 1, 2, 5. That's it. So I want to take these values, store them in a new variable called S1. So note, it doesn't have to be a single row or a single column. It's all the rows, these columns. So it will take row 1, row 2, row 5, or column 1, column 2, column 5, and shove them together so that they are in their own matrix. And I could do whatever column, rows 2, I could change it to rows 3 and 4. It will change now only the elements in rows 3 and 4 as well. But just which rows, which columns. Keep in mind it needs to be square, so you can't delete like you can't delete this last corner. You have to delete all of the row or all of the column at once. Same thing with accessing. It's going to be that overlap between the number of rows and columns, and modifying as well. Okay, let's keep going. S2, create a subarray that consists of rows 1, 3, and 5 of the matrix. So in A, take rows 1, 3, and 5. And then which columns? All of my columns. So I can use my colon to indicate all of the columns. So now I have rows 1, 3, and 5 isolated. And once again, I could change this as well to only some of the columns. I can also create, so this array is 1, 3, 5. I could have created it like this. 1, 2, 5. This will also give me the same thing because this is a vector. 1, 2, and 5 is 1, 3, 5. So you can create this array using any way you want. Just keep in mind it needs to be a row. I don't know. Will it work with a column? I've never tried. It will still work with a column array. Okay, keep going. So next one, create a 6x5 submatrix or matrix composed of the previous 2 subarrays. So S1, if I rerun this, S1 is a 5x3. S2 is a 3x5. So I want to use these to create a new matrix. So a new matrix that's composed of S1 and S2. I need to figure out how to combine these. Because S1 and S2, they don't have the same number of rows and the same number of columns. I can't just say S1 placed next to S2, because S2 only has 3 rows. It's going to expect 2 more rows. I also can't say S1 on top of S2, because it's expecting 2 columns over here that don't exist in S1. So I'm just going to have to transpose one of these. So it says create a 6 by 5 matrix. So that means I want 6 rows, 1 column. Or 6 rows, 5 columns. Which isn't possible. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Whatever. So either way, I need to transpose one of these. If I'm going to put S1 next to S2, that means I need to transpose S2. So now here's S1 and here's S2 transposed. If I want to put them next to each other, I need to transpose S1. Or on top of each other, I need to transpose S1. So here I have S1 transposed on top of S2. One of these options should be a 6 by 5, which is this one. So here's my option. S1, M3. Where is it? The other option gave me a 5 by 6. Okay, so here is what results in a 6 by 5. If I didn't transpose things, it would give me that dimension mismatch again. So when you are combining arrays, just play around with it. Try something, see what happens when you print it out, and figure out what's the issue. The nice thing in Matlab is you can always see your values. You can print things out in the command window by leaving the semicolon off. You can also double click. So M1 here in my workspace is a 6 by 6. If I double click on that box there, it will pop up a window that looks like Excel that shows you all of your numbers. So if you ever run into dimensions of arrays being concatenated or not consistent, print everything out. See what's happening. Open things up. This works, printing out in the command window works for relatively small matrices. I would say maybe 7 columns, depending on whether or not they're integers. Or floating point numbers. If they're not integers, they take up more space to print out. So there's only so much space to print out things in the command window, but you can always open up, just double click, and it will give you essentially what it looks like in Excel. So you can always look at your numbers in Matlab. This is amazing. You can't do this necessarily in other languages. So this is where Matlab really shines and really makes it a good language to learn, especially for a first language. Okay, let's get into a little more complicated. Let's look at some of our functions, some of the functions I talked about in the videos. What time does class end? 12:20? 12:20? We got 7 more minutes? Okay, so here this last one says determine the dimensions of the matrix. So if we want to determine the dimensions of the matrix, we can use the size function. And I'm going to point out the different ways that we can use size. So there's 4 main ways to use the size function. The first one is just to say size of A, where it's going to give you a 1 by 2 array where the first element is the number of rows and the second element is the number of columns. The two elements, rows, columns. The second way to use size is if we want R and C, the number of rows and columns, to be in their own separate variables, we can do something like this. We can ask the size function to return 2 values instead. So here it returns 1 value. Here we can ask it to return 2 values. So now when I run this, rows and columns, the 5 and the 5 are in their own separate variables. Keep in mind, it doesn't matter what you call these. If you called this col and you called this row, it will still, let me make a different, dang it. Create a new array. It will still put the number of rows in the first variable and the number of columns in the second variable. So keep that in mind. So RC. The third way we can use size is if we only want one of those numbers. So we could say the rows equal size A, comma 1, which essentially is the size of the matrix and then what dimension you want. So I want the first dimension. So the number of elements in the first dimension. Which is the number of rows, because rows is the first dimension. It's rows times columns times 3 dimensions times 4 dimensions times 5 dimensions times 6 dimensions. You can have as many dimensions as you want in Matlab. Similarly, I could get the number of columns like this. Where here it's the second dimension. So this is if you want 2 lines. Sometimes I'll do this frequently as well. And you'll see why when we get to loops, really. Yeah, so there's 4 main ways to use a size function. Here is where we get one single array with 2 numbers. Here where we can use, yes, row and col are the variable names. So R and C, so R we get the number of rows, number of columns. This is all in one line of code. If we want that separate for some odd obscure reason, we can just ask the size to give us one of the numbers. So give me the first dimension or give me the second dimension. Okay, one last example before, let me go to this one. So let's say I want to create this G matrix. I'm a little all over the place today, but I don't know. If you have any clarification and feedback for me to go over things on Wednesday, obviously we'll go over more examples. We'll start to modify and look a little bit more on what happens on the left-hand side of this equal sign. But if you want more clarification, go back, retake the quiz, and tell me what information you want. Okay, let's say I want to create this G matrix. So G, if you notice, is grouped with, like, there's groups. So we have this group here, this group here, and this group here. So I could type all of the numbers in, but that's the long way to do it. I want to do it the short way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create each individual grouping separately and then combine them with concatenation. So my first group, G1, is a bunch of 2s. I don't have a 2s function. I have a 1s function though. With 3 rows, 6 columns. This gives me a bunch of 1s. If you ever want to change a bunch of 1s into a bunch of other integers, just say integer times that. So this will multiply. We'll get more to this next week. But this will multiply all of these 1s by 2. So now G1 is a 3 by 6 grouping of 2s. My second grouping, the lower left, is a bunch of 1s. So it's 1s of 3, comma 3. So now I have G2. G3, I'll make that my other grouping, my lower right, which is a bunch of 0s. Once again, 3, comma 3. 3 rows, 3 columns. So now I want to put all of these together. So my final G, I'm going to create a new matrix called G, so open close brackets. I'm going to put G1 on top of G2 next to G3. However, I want G2 to be placed on top or next to G3 first, so I'm going to group that separately. So now I can combine everything into one single matrix. So now I created G2 using my 1s and 0s functions. I can do this all in one line of code as well. I could just say G equals 2 times 1s, 3 comma 6 on top of 1s, 3 comma 3 next to 0s, 3 comma 3. So that will give me the same thing. And just like with calculating expressions, you will get more comfortable with things as you go along. You might not have to always break things up. I like to use a piece of paper sometimes to figure it out if I can't do it spatially in my brain. Grouping things together like this on a piece of paper and writing on it. I know you can't download your homeworks, but just keep that in mind as an option. Okay. Class is done, right? 12:20. These weird times. Weird times mess me up. So I'll go ahead and stop there. Like I said, Wednesday we will get to more examples. I will try to focus more on Wednesday what happens on the left-hand side of this equal sign. There's just a lot that you can do. this week. There is just so much. So your Ibooks, let me pull that up for you guys. Your week 3 material for Ibooks, there's a lot. So if you look at week 3, you can see that it's 2 chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 4. So people can still screenshot, but it's watermarked. That's why. So it's chapter 3 and chapter 4, so there's a lot of reading. You do not need to do all of the challenge activities for Ibooks for chapter 3 and chapter 4, so look at the ones that are required. Some of them get pretty challenging. I will go over a couple next week. But this is your longest Ibooks assignment. If you look at weeks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the next longest is chapter 7, but other than that, there's not nearly as much work. So this is the longest Ibooks assignment. It is very important that you guys understand this material. Unfortunately, there's a lot here. That's a lot to take in. You guys will get more practice as we go along. And it's really important you guys understand this material. It gives you a lot of power, but it also means you can get in trouble really quickly. And we'll see how next week, really. But with that, class is over. I will stick around, answer some more questions if you guys have them. If not, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. This morning I made a comment about how this music seems a little too happy for all of the vomit that just came out. Yes, so the quiz is not a hard deadline. That is a suggestion so that you have some indication. Like, can you imagine watching this lecture without having watched those videos? Like, I'm sure some of you guys have done it. Like, it's just a lot. So the videos are meant to introduce you. I encourage you to watch them, take the quiz for the first time by 9 a.m. on Monday, and then, try it once or twice, pause, come to lecture, try it again later. I suggest you do a couple sections a day in the Ibooks. It really is up to you and how much time you have. In general, I would suggest you get them done by the deadline. I would suggest you get them done before you do the homework. That's my suggestion. And yes, Ibooks are now due on Monday instead of Sunday. We changed that to give you guys a little bit more time and access to office hours on Monday to finish up some challenge activities. Any final questions? Okay. Have a great rest of the day.